Greetings. It is I again, your King, Clifford Jefferson, in reincarnation of King Edgar the Peaceful, known as Jesus Christ, the King of Peace, sitting down from God with the fifth caravan, Jews on the folk rule of Jerusalem. I have, as always, by my side, Sister Godwin from the House of Godwin, who assisted at the Battle of Hastings, as well as the House of Belmont. Archbishop Belmont is here as well to assist me. His assistant, the CA called Judah from the House of Murphy. We all, as well as we have our family who attend the class as regularly as they're supposed to. Sister Allen from the House of Allen, Sister Walker from the House of Walker, Brother Gray from the House of Gray. Who else is here today?
Brother Cameron.
Who else? Brother Cameron. Brother Milligan, you there?
Yeah, Brother Milligan on.
All right, greetings everyone. Welcome to part 2 of unentitled lesson that will soon be titled once we get done with it. But this is a marvelous lesson in regards to understanding the origin of who we are as peers of our lords, who were those who decided cases in reference to our birthright, dealing with our intel estates as heirs and successors, according to the original contract that governs all issues governing the land. Apparently, we have lost that birthright as regards to not understanding who we are in lieu of that birthright that's protected by way of our allegiance and our political status that was given to us by our ancestors who were English nationals. This story or this lesson or podcast is to enlighten you in regards to that you are truly English nationals. The only thing that is missing the understanding of how this was taken away from you. And this is what we come to clear up today. If you pay the close attention to part 1, we discussed the relevancy of Somerset versus Stewart, which was a case decided by the King's Bench in 1772 in regards to the status of a gentleman by the name of James Somerset, who was assumed to be a slave by Charles Stewart. Now, mind you, this is a 1772 case. The King's Bench jurisdiction goes back to the 12th century. And we know that when it was dissolved in the and if I'm not mistaken, I think it was the 17th century, the authority transferred to Pennsylvania by the 1722 Act, which transferred the jurisdiction of the King's Bench to Pennsylvania. And Pennsylvania is one of the 13 colonies of all the 13 colonies, which consist of what we call the United States, now called states. That's a problem because this is how we lost our birthright. We by becoming slaves by way of these conditions that they are placed upon us. And we're using James Somerset, who was enslaved by Charles Stewart, who descended down from that family named Stewart, who consists of de facto monarchs going from King James all the way up to those who succeeded him, which was the House of Handover under King George I, King George II, King George III. These were all governors under what we call the Sea Bubble Act. The Sea Bubble Act was an act of a company that took place or took a part in what we call slavery. All right, and the slaves, those who were considered slaves, were us, English nationals, as a result of us understanding the truth in history about our surname, all right, which we're going to show you today in regards to the so-called matter concerning James Somerset and the so-called assumed master, Charles Stewart, as we said, in regards to this man's freedom in English territory. And we know that in England, there was no slave, there was no slavery, according to their law, before they were usurped by those who were imposturing as being English monarchs and English lawmakers and etc. We're going to clear that up today. So all those who didn't get a preview of the first lesson, I suggest you go look at that one before you take it upon yourself to review this one. So without further ado, let's continue. We talked about James, forgive me, I'm getting a little sick, I'm under the weather, so I'll try to speak as clear as possible. James Somerset, who was a slave, and the matter was heard by the King's Bench. And the King's Bench power was transferred to Pennsylvania Supreme Court in 1722. Now, a year later, they passed what they call the Black Acts of 1723. And the Black Acts were those who were poaching and stealing merchandise, as well as not just the merchandise, but the landowners themselves, and enslaving them by way of the British takeover of the colonies, by way of appointing themselves as the ruling family. And we're going to get to the undermining of this, because as we see, then with the Sea Bubble Act, let's go back there. South Sea Bubble Act, as we already read, everybody can see these, right?
Yes.
Okay. Just reiterating the facts that we already submitted in the podcast for those who didn't follow the first one. It says that the encouragement of the fishery was based upon a British Joint Stock Company founded in January 1711, created as a public-private partnership to consolidate and reduce the cost of the national debt. So they were in the national debt. So they were using slavery of the Negroes to pay off debt. It said to generate income in 1713. Now remember, in 1713, Queen Anne is ruling. She's ruling in 1713. All right, the company was granted a monopoly of Asiento de Negro to supply African slaves to island and to South Seas and South America. Let's just go back to the part where it says she's ruling, and then we can move on. This is the slave trade. The Treaty of Utrecht from 1713, once again, Queen Anne is ruling, granted Britain Asiento de Negros, lasting 30 years to supply the Spanish colony with 4,800 slaves per year. Per year, y'all. Britain was permitted to open offices, franchises, companies, corporations in Buenos Aires, Caracas, Cartagena, Havana, Panama, Portobello, and Veracruz to arrange the Atlantic slave trade. If y'all online, I hope you are listening to what I'm saying, because this is the monarch, Queen Anne, who passed it to King George I, who passed it to King George II, who passed it to King George III, on down to the House of Windsor, who are still overseeing the slave trade as us, as being what we assume nickel, black, colored, and Ethiopians. How do I know that? We already established that Queen Anne already established companies to be established in what we call the territories belonging to the English. 1740, the government announced that a quarter of the profit will be reserved for Queen Anne and further 7.5% for financial advisors. Minister Gilligan, some company board members refused to accept the contract on these terms, and the government was obliged to reverse its decision. Blah, blah, blah. That's not important. What is important is understanding who took a part in the slave trade, because it just wasn't the British monarchs. It was also the Portuguese, the Spanish, and the Moors. How we know that? Let's look at it.
Wow.
There we go. Asiento de Negro. Asiento de Negro, agreement of blacks. Now, first of all, ain't nobody identify as black other than those who are what we assume to be Negro, black, colored, Ethiopian. But here you got an agreement of the blacks, which was the monopoly contract between Spanish Crown and various merchants for the right to provide African slaves to colonies in Spanish America. The Spanish Empire was rarely engaged in the transatlantic slave trade directly from Africa itself, choosing instead to contract out the importation of foreign merchants from nations more prominent in that part of the world, typically Portuguese, Genovese, but later the Dutch, French, and then the British. Did y'all hear that?
Mm-hmm.
And then the British. Now let's look at this, go back up to this chart. Right here. Holders of the so-called agreements of the blacks. started in the early 1518 to 1519 with the Portuguese, then the Genoese, then the Dutch and Portuguese, then the French, then the British. All right, and this is all Queen Anne ruling because she was the monarch at this time. She passes King George on the 1st. Now let's go back to the sea bubble before we move on and see who's the monarch, the governor's ruling there. Let's see if they show us. Bubble Act. These are your governors. Officers. Are y'all ready? Now, we already said in 1713, Queen Anne established new companies dealing with their slave trade. Now, these are the officers of the South Company known as the Cinthio de Negro. All right? Governors. Robert Harley, the first Earl of Oxford, George, Prince of Wales, King George I, y'all see it?
Mm-hmm.
Slave trade. King George II, slave trade. King George III, slave trade. King George IV, slave trader. King William IV, slave trader. Queen Victoria, slave trader. So all these people were slave traders of the so-called Negroes. How we know that? Because it just said under the Acento de Negro that these were all the holders of the so-called agreements of the blacks who were African slaves, soon to be African slaves. They were not African slaves. They were English nationals who descended from the Plantation Crown before you had what the War of the Roses that took place between New York and the land classes. How we know that? It says the first one to hold them was the Portuguese.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's go ahead. In 1614, the Iberian Union fell apart, and the Portuguese Restoration War began between 1614 and 1651. There was no essential slave arrival to the Spanish America's decline precipitously. All right. Now here you see the more there? Y'all see it for yourselves. So this is a slave of the Portuguese. One second, let me blow it up some more. Good. Y'all see it? Everybody see that, right?
Yes.
That's a Acento Negro right there. He's in the courts of the Portuguese. Because he just said, early holders of it were the Portuguese.
So to clarify, the guy with the mustache, he was the Portuguese, correct?
Yes.
And the one that was in the back, that was the Berber that they were enslaving as Negroes.
Yes, very important fact. I need y'all to understand that because it said the first one was the Portuguese, then the Genoese, then the Dutch, Portuguese, then the French, then the British, then the Spanish. Dates are very important. Now let's bring this home, y'all. Y'all gonna be proud of y'all, King. Check this out. All right. So we know that all the monarchs, so Queen Anne, established new companies that were inherited by King George I, the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, and on down to Queen Elizabeth of the House of Windsor, because these are considered the United Kingdoms, who are still got the citizens subject to this type of political status. All right, so we got to go to the root to the problem to find out why we're in this problem, because the same problem we're in, James Somerset was in it. going back to Charles Stewart, who were the same Stuarts who enslaved us as we've seen from Queen Anne. Because if you have the Charles Stewart in 1772 and the Stewart ruling family in the early 17th century, then you know they got to be connected by the surname. Got to be. All right, so let's go here. Tangier. Everybody familiar with Tangier?
Yes.
All right, Tangier. Tangier. Y'all see the face up there? The flag of Tangier.
The Berber.
There ain't no Brats or barbarian, but there ain't no Berber. That's not us. But we know the origin of the people of Tangier is us, but that is not us. So there's a problem with that history. So let's find out what's going on with this history, because we can start from the beginning or we can start from the present. Which way I want to go? The present or the past?
Let's give them with the past.
You want to start from the past?
Yeah.
Okay, let's start from the past. Let's go back to the Sitio de Negro. And it said the earliest holder of the Negroes under in lieu of the slave trade was the Portuguese, right?
Yes.
And we know that the Portugal and Spain is over in what? The Eastern Hemisphere. It's on the coast of the Iberian Peninsula. Well, it's on the Iberian Peninsula, Portuguese and Spain.
We'll call it Europe.
Europe. It's in Europe. But it's on the western side of Europe.
Mm-hmm.
Northern Western Europe. Portugal. All right. Then you got Spain. It's where all the Moorish history comes in. All right. But it just said that the Sitio, or the holders of the Sitio, the contract referring to the Negroes, were the Portuguese. So since y'all want me to start back in time, let's go back to the Anglo and Portuguese alliance. Y'all see that?
Going up. Yep.
So that's an Anglo and Portuguese treaty in 1373. Signed, the Kingdom of England and the Kingdom of Portugal. The Kingdom of England, you know you're talking about us. The Kingdom of Portugal, these are the ones with slave traders. Can we agree?
Agree.
All right. Sister Galveston, you feel like reading?
Okay. Anglo-Portuguese Treaty of 1373 was signed on 16th of June, 1373, between King Edward III of England and King Ferdinand and Queen Eleanor of Portugal. They established a treaty of perpetual friendships, unions, and alliances between the two seafaring nations.
Read that part of the paragraph again.
Anglo-Portuguese Treaty of 1373 was signed on June 16, 1373, between King Edward III of England and King Ferdinand and Queen Eleanor of Portugal. It established a treaty of perpetual friendships, unions, and alliances between the two seafaring nations.
Okay. So we see England and Portugal had a treaty established in 1373 under King Edward III. King Edward III is the King of England, whose house the Plantagenet crown.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just look at it just to make sure. Edward III, King of England, predecessor to Edward II, successor to Richard II, burial place, Westminster Abbey, London. Issue, Edward the Black Prince, Isabella, Countess of Bedford, Joan England, Lionel, Antwerp, Duke of Clarence, John Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster, which is the son, House Plantagenet crown. So who I'm reincarnation of King Edward the Peaceful, and I descended down from Godfrey the Fifth Caravan Jew, the one who established the Plantagenet crown, where Edward III descended down from. Okay, so we seeing that Edward III has an alliance with the Portugal, who was the first holder of the so-called Black people who were considered to be slaves, that went on to become, continue to be slaves under the monarchs, under the House of Tudors, House of Stewart, as well as the House of Windsor, and on down to the present houses, just based off this Anglo and Portuguese treaty that we're reading right now. How do we know that? Because this is in 1373.
Wow.
All right, let's go ahead. Tangier. Back to Tangier. Middle Ages. The history of Tangier starts with the Almoravid dynasty. All right? That's what they say it starts with. That's what you see it. But when you go up here, Tangier, Spanish, the city in northwestern Morocco. It is the Maghreb coast of the western entrance to the Strait of Gibraltar, where the Mediterranean Sea meets the Atlantic coast off the Cape Spartel. The town's capital is Tangier Tetuan El Hoceima, region of Wel Tangier Esilia prefecture of Morocco. Now, why is this important? This brings us back to the Kingdom of Iberia. Kingdom of Iberia. This flag goes back. This is the Gregorian, so the year would be 649 BC. And 580 will be to time about 1027, if I'm not mistaken, in the Berber year, because there is no Gregorian calendar, if y'all know y'all calendars. So the year is actually 649 BC. And in 649, the last ruling pharaoh of what they assume to be Egypt is Ramses III, because it was only 26 dynasties. Ramses the first, second, and third were the last ruling pharaohs of what they call Egyptians, which they are not Egyptians, they are Berbers. We're about to prove it. If we go over here, so you don't have to look through all this. Roman period and Roman Parthian rivalry. Iberia during the Roman Empire. Now we're not even in 1373. We're back in 117 AD. All right. So we need to realize who we are. So we got to go back before their records. So we're dealing with the Kingdom of Iberia that has an English flag flying on it, going back to 3000 BC. But Rome invaded in 117 AD, as y'all can see here. Everybody see that date? So let's look what this date say. (117 AD). There y'all see the Gregorian year. There is no Gregorian year because the Gregorian calendar was not created until 1582 by Pope Gregory XIII. So if there's no calendar to establish the records in regards to the history of so-called Rome, then how could Rome ever exist? Because if there is no Roman calendar, i.e. Gregorian calendar, then the only calendar that can be in place is the Berber calendar, because BC means Berber calendar. And in that year, it's 1067. So when you go back to the Kingdom of Iberia, give me 1 second, let me just find it. Where was it at? Kingdom of Iberia. Here we go. No, that's not it. Y'all bear with me, just find it. Let me just look it back up again. No biggie. What's our time look like, Archbishop? Archbishop?
Yeah, we have about 6 minutes left.
Okay. Kingdom of Iberia. Y'all see the flag here? And this flag goes back 3000 BC. Now, there ain't no Gregorian year, so the year is actually 649 BC. And 649, as I said, Samson III, our Berber pharaoh, is ruling. All right? But now we're looking at the kingdom of Iberia, and we're going back to 117, when Rome invaded England. Right here, because you see England lit up in green here. Not just England is being invaded by Rome, but Spain, Portugal, France, Mauritania, Egypt, all this is being invaded by imperial provinces instead of by Rome.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not 117 AD, it's 1067. It is not 117 AD, we just proved it. Let's go back to the date. If there is no 117, then the only year it could be is 1067, right here. But that's in the Berber year. That's our year. All right. Now, if it's 1067, let's look up 1067 on the calendar. There you see the first English king, William the Conqueror.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're talking about Rome invading England, this is 1067 when they did it, 1066. Going back to the Battle of Hastings, which my wife, Sister Godwinson, Queen Godwinson, descended down from. So as you can see, that there was no Roman story. The only story that was actually happening was when William the Conqueror invaded England. When he invaded England, he invaded all the territories that were part of what we call the Kingdom of Iberia. This is what we call the East and the West schisms. We talked about that in previous lectures in our podcast. It's called the East and West schisms. So why is this important? When we go back to the Treaty of Portugal, 1373, that deals with the Anglo going back King Edward III. This gets into the time of what we call the War of the Roses. Now, why is this important? Why is this important? Let's go back to this brother, James Somerset. Very important. Everybody who's viewing this podcast should be asking, how did this guy get the name James Somerset? How did he get the name Somerset? If he came from Africa. Now listen to it. We just showed you a flag of the Kingdom of Iberia back in the 649 BC. Now we're showing you English and Tangier. (1661 to 1684). Right? Before it was English Tangier, it was Portugal Tangier. This goes back to the 14th century. Let's go to Portugal, because we know the English Tangier came before the Portuguese Tangier. And we know the Portuguese were the ones who were enslaving the so-called English, Anglo-Saxon Berbers. Now they call them the Moors. Because as you've seen in the what they call the Sitio Negro, Somerset. God bear with me. I got a lot of information over here.
Point of interest, qualifying statement.
Go ahead, CA.
So he who writes your book sets your timeline. What the king is describing to you the timeline. And what one has to know is that after the Punic War, Rome, or William the Conqueror, if you will, had set about to conquer all the Berber territories. That's what we just viewed in the map. And in the conquering, there was a re-education or a redistribution of abstract education opposed to concrete. So now this is like a spell being put on you, so where you're not being able to research your own history because one people are being replaced for another. The Anglo and Portuguese alliance shows the transition of power from the original Anglo-Saxon Berber rulers in their known kingdoms over to different monarchies, or the usurpation of the business practices, which is slavery at the time. So the slavery that's taking place is now is a form of doing business that's being introduced in these territories, Portugal, Spain, on into the Americas. And that practice of slavery also deals with miseducation or redirection. So your up becomes down, and your concrete becomes abstract. I yield.
Well said. And as I was saying, dealing with the agreement of the Negroes, Portugal were the first holders during the Iberian Union. It just said it.
And that'll be our 30 minutes for part 2.
Okay, let's get it back up, running ASAP.